So, before I begin this, I just wanted to set into context where we are a little bit. Right now, it's 2020. The world has been halted by a pandemic that's been attacking our young, our elderly, and our sick. People are dying. There's this huge debate about the ethics and effectiveness and the consequences of being locked down or in a quarantine state. Small businesses are being shut down, masks are becoming mandatory, and people are frustrated with the unknown of when this is going to end. So people are beginning to protest for their liberty. They think it's being taken away from them. And this protest is largely fueled by misinformation, the idea that this virus is a hoax or that this is some political power grab. And it's because there's so much information that's being manipulated by media all over the place, not just Fox, not just CNN, but all of it. News articles, everything. It's people taking conjecture as if it's fact, and it's because we're dealing with an unprecedented event, and this virus is new. It's yet to be conquered. We don't have medicine for it. We don't have a vaccine for it, and at the very least, we don't have a method that eases the symptoms as they occur. So what I wanted to do is break down a news clip. This one in particular is Tucker Carlson on Fox News, but I wanted to expose in some deductive way how these news junkets are just taking slices of information and compounding them together to reach a conclusion that doesn't hold up.
It's scary. 2 Sundays ago, a man in Colorado called Matt Mooney went to a park near his house to throw a ball with his wife and his 6-year-old daughter. The park was deserted, which meant the Mooneys were essentially standing alone in a field. The police came anyway. They handcuffed Matt Mooney in front of his family, and they threw him in the back of a police cruiser. By state order, Colorado residents were required to stay in their homes, and Mooney was outside, so he was taken into custody.
So this is a real news story. It's a simple retelling of what happened. And what he's using here to influence you is called priming. And priming is basically when someone uses keywords that trigger how you're going to respond emotionally to the next thing that's being said or the next event that you see. It's a technique used in film, documentaries. It's basically how you influence your audience when they're learning about what you're showing them. So word choices like, or phrases where he's handcuffing Matt Mooney, threw him into the back of a police cruiser, versus was arrested. It's the conscious choice they're making to drive a dramatic narrative of injustice. So it's important also to pay attention how every single news report does this, every single article does this, political speeches, and this is a tactic that is simply to trigger emotions so you can be persuaded. And also, you want to notice here structure of how he's presenting information. And instead of starting with the actual facts, that by state order, Colorado residents are required to stay at home, and then revealing that Matt Mooney had violated the order, which would make Matt Mooney look less sympathetic because he violated an order. Now Mooney looks like a victim instead of an idiot. So you can kind of see these slight differences can make a huge impact on how you understand a story, because we're also at the whim of masking, which they use a lot. And masking is basically, we can only interpret so much information. Our brains can only take information in a certain order and at a certain pace. And so what they do here, and this is a Trump speech thing too, is that by the time they say certain pieces of information, they're already on to the next thing. You don't have time to really interpret it for yourself. It's just, oh, now I'm hearing a new piece of information. It's also similar with bad movies, like a really bad Transformer movie. Like they just go from plot point to plot point without really making anything make sense or provide any value. It's just, oh, on to the next one. So, if this was provided in a linear way, in a neutral way, the story would be Matt Mooney violated a state order and got arrested. So instead, now it's structured in a way so that we think, oh, this poor guy got arrested in front of his family, and that's terrible. So very small manipulations that go a long way. But let's see what else.
The next day, Jared Polis, who was the governor of Colorado, did not apologize. Instead, he issued an executive order extending his lockdown until the end of April. Polis included no scientific justification for that decision. Instead, he summed up his reasoning with a line fit for a tank top. Quote, simply put, by staying home, Coloradans are saving lives.
This next line is a little hard to explain, but it's basically he's making this assumption for the audience that there's an apology that's needed. By saying he didn't apologize, it's a presumptuous statement that the previous situation even needed one. And again, depending on how that situation is described, we're either going to think, yes, he does deserve an apology because he's being unjustly punished, or we think, no, he violated a rule and he's getting what he deserved. Thusly, he does not deserve an apology. But clearly, Tucker Carlson is making up the mind of the audience and then moving on to the next sentence before you can even compute that this is happening. The other part of this is a bogus conjecture or a misleading thought that Polis didn't provide scientific reasons for his decision. And this is going to be a recurring thing here. But the logical argument against that is, why would a governor be responsible for divulging scientific research and go on at length about it during a conference that's meant for announcements and questions? While he should be informed of the science, he is not directly responsible for disseminating it at length. And there are dozens of videos already existing that show the science behind how air droplets spread and how this virus, or any virus really, gets spread by people being in public together. So why would he sit there for an extra hour to describe information that people can Google in 2 seconds? Again, this is all adding to the fact that this is an agendaed attack where we're demanding things of our elected officials that are unrealistic simply to make the case that he's bad for making these rules, because the overall message of this piece is to discredit the lockdown. And, the other thing about this sentence or statement is like he puts his own little spin on a neutral statement that Polis is saying, that the decree of simply put, staying home, Coloradans are saving lives, is the statement that we look for from politicians. It's this broad idea that sets the tone for the society so that we can have peace of mind through troubling times. We know that because we're staying at home, we're doing a good thing for someone that we might never meet. And that's a benevolent thing. It's a good thing. The only demeaning part of this is being forced upon us by Tucker Carlson, who refers to it as worthy of a tank top, which is a very demonstrative thing to say about it, because he's trying to further the agenda and trying to think for the audience instead of stating plain facts and then letting us decide how we feel.
Simply put. In other words, it's simple. Follow my orders and people will live. Disobey my orders and people will die.
This next manipulation is a mixture of visual and tone of speech. So first notice the furrowed brow, the sign of the hunter, this fierce brow of an attack dog barking or an angry child who didn't get what he wanted for his birthday. And it's next to a graphic that is so precisely manicured to elicit the maximum amount of nationalistic rage. We have the tattered American flag like it's been raped and left for dead, with thick metal chains and a padlock that attracts the idea of slavery and claustrophobia. And then with the greatest set of words that aim at triggering any diehard libertarian: shut up and obey. Not one person in the political world has said anything remotely this crass. They've only stated publicly thoughts of concerns for each other and every single one of us. They have made a very simple and easy for everyone to do type of idea that keeps us safe for the moment. No one has ever said, shut up and obey, except for this news report. The irony of which is that all these visuals are like hypocritical and hyper hypocritical, because he wants you to shut up and listen to what he says and obey what he says without so much as a thought for yourself, because he wants you to walk away from this news clip with like a firm, angry, anti-lockdown attitude, because all that matters is your liberties. It doesn't matter if your liberty gets someone else killed, or even though you become the oppressor because you think your liberty is greater than another's. But isn't that what you're so upset about in the first place? So, like, why would you embody the thing that you're trying to speak out against? It makes no sense.
Around the country, governors are making that very same claim. Most outdoor areas, common outdoor areas in this country, have been closed in response to the pandemic. People are being arrested for sitting alone on the beach or walking on nature trails. Not a single politician making these decisions has bothered to explain the science behind them. Specifically, which studies show that staying indoors, at home, at the pharmacy, at the grocery store, is safer than being outdoors? Politicians don't tell us, and they're never asked. The media support these decisions reflexively.
He brings up a good point here that they aren't asked for the science. And it's because they aren't scientists. They don't do the labor and they don't understand what makes it into the science world. You know, these governors are announcers and they collate information and they make plans with that information that's in the best interest of their people in mind. And, you know, I've said this before, but he's repeating this idea that they don't tell us science. And I think it's driving at this insane idea that A, we are not capable of finding information ourselves. And B, we are totally dependent on this governor standing at a podium to announce all the science that's been discovered, which is ridiculous. And honestly, nobody would watch it if that's what those were like. I mean, people barely watch that stuff as it is. So, and, you know, I'm pretty sure that they host panels that announce new science all the time. There's articles being published all the time with new science research, what have you. And it's really a matter of each one of us tuning in and also people giving each other the resources to find detailed information so that the main points of a governor's announcements can be stated without wasting a lot of time.
Last week, when Duval County, Florida reopened its beaches, Twitter lit up with the hashtag Florida Morons. The Washington Post wrote an entire piece celebrating the fact that families in Jacksonville were being attacked on social media. It was yet another opportunity to deliver a hot blast of nasty self-righteousness, as if the country needs more of that.
So I laugh out loud at this type of within the same breath contradiction. Hot blast of nastiness. Like, honestly, if you listen to yourself and had the slightest amount of self-awareness, you'd see how he's just feeding into this very thing he's trying to insult. Do two wrongs make a right now? Is that what Tucker is trying to say? That if someone's being an asshole, you just have to be a bigger asshole and then blame them for being an asshole, and that's how we make progress? Like, nasty self-righteousness. Like, just wait, okay? Also, he brings up this story of the beaches for absolutely no reason, and then glances over the new spike in corona cases that came up specifically because they opened the beaches. And, you know, there's no time to think about that. Let's just go on in the next sentence.
But let's set aside the casual judgment for a moment and consider the science behind all of this. What does the research actually tell us about the perils of being outside?
So before we go any further, I urge you to look up these articles and do this research on your own, or ask people around you that you trust with that have maybe a higher intellect, or maybe are like they dedicated their lives to studying this stuff. Like, those are the types of people we need to be listening to anyways. But like, even me doing a very scant, very small amount of Googling led me to many articles that are from all over the place that state social distancing is the key here, in that you can be outdoor or indoor. It's really just how far away you are from another person. And the lack of space for people to go outside and be safely apart is more of a failure of our urban designs that favor commercial landscapes. And they thusly choke the possibility for people to be outside and safely apart. But keep in mind, Fox News can't take the conversation in that direction because it's going to point the finger at the big businesses that care more about their profits than finding the balance with nature that would have helped alleviate this predicament in the first place. And if there are enough green spaces preserved in a given urban landscape, it's likely we'd have enough space to go outside and still put into practice the safety measures that are widely agreed upon by every major source of research on viral transmission. So, what does Tucker Carlson have to say?
As it happened, there's quite a bit of research on that question. It turns out, and you may have guessed this already because it's very obvious, that enclosed spaces are a dangerous place to be in a pandemic.
Again, I'm going to stop right there and say, look this up for yourself, because even before he divulges any information, he's drawing his conclusion, and it's very broad.
That was the conclusion of a study earlier this month in the Journal of the American Medical Association. USA Today quoted one of the authors of that study, an MIT professor. She put it this way, quote, "When one is outside with air circulation or wind, the virus is easily dispersed and less concentrated." That makes sense. Another study from earlier this month was more specific about it. That study looked at 320 towns in China over a period of more than a month during the pandemic in order to determine how the virus spreads. Turns out the most common place patients were infected, their homes. 80% of outbreaks began in the home. 34% of new cases began on public transportation. The number outside? Here's the conclusion, quote, all identified outbreaks of 3 or more cases occurred in an indoor environment, which confirms that sharing indoor space is a major infection risk, end quote.
So this is funny. I sort of also did a small amount. I literally just Googled the transmission of SARS-CoV-2, and what it says on one of the pages is, quote, preprints are preliminary reports of work that have not been certified by peer review. They should not be relied on to guide clinical practice or health-related behavior and should not be reported in news media as established information. I will provide the link below for that particular website that has this information on it. While this may be accurate, it does not cover how a virus is contracted, which is the big issue here. Obviously, logically speaking, a person that goes out into the world who contracts the virus and brings it home will then spread it to the people in the home because transmission is greater in an enclosed space. But what about homes that are healthy? How do we keep spaces that we know are safe? So it makes no sense then to go outside, potentially to contract the disease, and then bring it home and then spread it to others. It's a chicken and the egg debacle. If the home is clean, how does it become infected? And the answer to that is exactly the counterpoint to Tucker's entire report. If you stay inside a healthy home, you'll be less likely to contract the disease. End of story. So now what these media folks tend to do is bend reality, and they take a fragment of the thought and then leave it open to interpretation. They don't divulge the fully rounded statement or the full thought that actually helps people understand what they're dealing with. Instead, they want you to be angry and confused because animals that are angry and confused are easier to control. Period. So look up these reports yourself. I can't stress this enough. Read the full reports verbatim. A lot of them talk about air droplets entering ventilation systems and spreading that way. And the real problem here is that this particular news agenda is about defiance to an order that is meant to be for the greater good of all people, so that we all get out of this situation without prolonging it another 3 months, another 6 months, or another year. And if we give people enough time to develop a method to fight this virus, we will all succeed. But this insidious idea that this particular report's driving at, where it's not that big of a deal, is dangerous. So the medical reports, the journal articles, the things from actual scientists will do a better job putting into context and explaining what's being said without the angle or the second agenda. And they're neutral. There's studies of what's going on, and they're reporting based on data that they collected by people with knowledge about what that data is. So it's important that you yourself read them at length and understand them without the media involved, because they're just snipping out one sentence that makes their life sound purposeful, and it's very irresponsible. Think of how many bad movies you've watched because one critic said one positive thing, but around all of that is just, this movie's terrible, this acting is terrible, but it was funny for a second. It's like, it's very, very manipulated.
That study, by the way, is available to all. It's online. Jared Polis could read it if he bothered.
So I love this attitude he puts out there that contradicts his earlier plight about the self-righteous, nasty self-righteousness. I mean, what did he say actually?
Was yet another opportunity to deliver a hot blast of nasty self-righteousness, as if the country needs more of that. Any politician could read it. They haven't. They're not interested. Stay inside, save lives. They repeat that like the vacuous bumper sticker that it is. In fact, actual science suggests the opposite is true. Being outside is far safer. It's also good for you. Researchers have consistently found that fresh air and exercise boost your immune system. It's just like your grandmother claimed. As a recent piece in The Atlantic put it, quote, the outdoors and sunshine are such strong factors in fighting viral infections that a 2009 study of the extraordinary success of outdoor hospitals during the 1918 influenza epidemic suggested that during the next pandemic, which we're living through, we should encourage the public to spend as much time outdoors as possible, end quote. As much time outdoors as possible. Yet, as you may have noticed, our politicians are doing precisely the opposite and is driving America to neurosis.
So here he is relying on ancient knowledge, the stating a plain fact about the benefits of outdoor activity. And these are true, but they're not set within the context of what a new virus that has no remedy, that is spreading like wildfire, will do. It's ignoring the present reality and relying on a brainwashing of sorts or some sort of mantra that's going to stop you from getting sick. Like, oh, if I go outside, the sunshine and the exercise will make me healthy. If I go outside, the sunshine will make me, it's short-sighted and ignorant, and it's only half of a statement. Does outdoors and exercise and sunshine make you a healthier person? Yes. Does going outdoors and contracting a virus that spreads to everyone you come in contact with fair and responsible? No. And that's the other sentence that needs to be said, because that's what's real. It's the reality of our situation. And this isn't like anything that's occurred in the past. The diseases of the 1918s is not the disease of 2020. And it's because, if it was, we wouldn't be having this conversation. None of this would be necessary. We wouldn't have this report. There wouldn't need to be a counter report. And we wouldn't have any discussion whatsoever, because we'd be winning and we'd be in business and there would be no lockdown. So this whole mindset of taking this old information and stating it like it's the present day truth is wrong.
Prescriptions for anti-anxiety medications have risen dramatically nationwide in the past 6 weeks. So the question is, why are our leaders hurting us on purpose? And the answer is because they can. Controlling the population makes them feel powerful. Our fear makes us easier to control. The average politician has no incentive to follow the science and thus let the public outside. You may be suffering intensely, but they're enjoying it.
Everything he just said in this final little thing is conjecture and opinion. So people in government are people, and they're not perfect. People are not perfect. These are people that we elected to represent and look over the whole of our society. And they are still subject to imperfections. This is not a black and white world, and it never was. There's a lot of gray and a lot of unknowns. And a lot of these people are making the best judgment they can with the available information. So to concoct this narrative that there's an evil person in a tower trying to obtain world dominance is just as much as a fantasy as Lord of the Rings. And while corruption is possible, the basic vices of people can be problematic to our system. It's not a single politician is enjoying any of this. This is the type of situation that supersedes all of that pettiness. This is basic survival against nature. This is the oldest fight we've ever known. And this news organizations, others like it, news junkets online, they want to paint this world as this neat set of squares and boxes that fit together perfectly, and as if everyone is in total control of what they do and what happens around them. And it's simply just not true. Nothing is perfect and no system is without flaw. There is no box. To say that this is somehow a choice that people want to make, to subject people to some sort of torture, is absolutely fucked up. If he wants to know why people are buying more medication, why they feel more neurotic, well, you just have to break it down and read between the lines to see why this type of reporting is exactly the thing creating more neurosis. Except he's trying to put the blame on anything but himself. It's childish, and again, it's dangerous. So we live in a time of technology with communication so widespread and so easily accessed, and with pundits on both sides that are competing for your attention. They will say almost anything to get it. They're essentially held at gunpoint by their executive teams to perform. So imagine working where every syllable that comes out of your mouth has to align with a predetermined goal. And the goal here is to make the viewer believe something. You'll say whatever they tell you to say because you want the job, you want the money, you want the fame, you want to be on TV, you want to be in the public eye because that gives you fulfillment. But there's a trade-off there. When you think that there are billions of dollars at stake that are being traded by news outlets and money that comes from every corner of the earth and from every living, breathing person, whether they have it or not. That's all these people want, is your money, because your money is your vote that says, yes, I want this. So it's time to recognize what these institutions are and stop using them for like a shield of righteousness or an excuse to be bitter towards one another. We need to see between the lines and understand that there's interpretation, opinion, fears, and advertisements all mixed together now. And this news is not the authority it once was. And we seldom receive well rounded, thought out material to absorb. Look at it in other terms. If we only eat McDonald's every day and we order the same food every day, we will not be providing our body with enough vitamins and sustenance to be our best selves. If we continue to only ingest this information from the one source in the one way that we're able to get it, we will be suffering every second of every day under the oppression of misinformation that makes it so much harder to live a life unburdened by what is right and wrong. This type of news is wrong, and we need to demand better practices, a better world, not an advertised one, but a real one that we make together, because there's no other purpose in life but to work for each other and improve.